Yes, go ahead. Ibrahim, please.
Thank you, Shanti. I really appreciate your presentation. I wonder, keep thinking, just it took a little bit time to start your presentation. It was a part of virtue ethics. How to be patient. This is a joke. But, especially about the handicapped and old people, just you remind me the book of Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Morrie. And there's also a good movie about that.
What is it called?
Tuesdays with Morrie. I'll put it in the
Tuesdays with
chat.
Morrie. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, although there was, when this book is written, there was no philosophical counseling, as we practice today. But I think this book is also very good, how Professor Morrie used the virtue ethics and some ethical values to his class and also to overcome his disease, and how he gave the final lesson on that. What do you think about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, that goes into bibliotherapy too, right? Giving our clients books that are helpful to them along the way, and also drawing from our own, own experience and being open and vulnerable about that. How we use virtue ethics in our own lives too. Yes, so those are two things that come to my mind, and so I'm glad you reminded me of it. I'll start putting it on my list for my clients, especially those ones that are confronting death, as you say.
Oh, Ibrahim, you may or may not be aware that Shanti has previously, I think it was last year, Shanti, or the year before, you gave a wonderful presentation on literature in philosophical counseling. So you're on the same wavelength, because she's done this kind of work with many kinds of literature. Yes, was that last year, Shanti, or the year before?
Yeah, I think it was during the pandemic, right? Thank you for reminding me, Lou. I really, get my mind focused on one thing, but right. That was something that I routinely use books, and I used Henry James too, Lou. I use the books of Henry James also as ways to illustrate to clients ethical issues, since he was so involved with them. I mean, we can all think of a million books, and of course, it's hard to refer clients to really tough philosophical texts. So something like Tuesdays with Morrie brings these points home in ways that are a little more human than asking them to read Epictetus or Socrates, right? So,
yeah, I just, recently I was reading the Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, and one of the most devastating day, he just look at the sky, a clear sky, and the cloud is sweeping. He says, "Thank you, heavens, thank you, God, I am here. Unless I would not appreciate the whole life, how the world is so amazing, so tremendous." So at the heart of the misery, at the heart of the most vulnerable of his life, he discovered, through nature, and also he totally came back home as a new man of literature, as you know. Thank you.
Yes, what comes to my mind too is that one of the things I do regularly in the beginning of my work with clients is I talk with them about the fact that we're not unlike in a Holocaust or kind of, situation, like a concentration camp. Now today, it's our circumstances are very, very difficult. And Viktor Frankl's book, Meaning in Life, is like that too. That is a similar idea. And then An Interrupted Life by Eddie Hilsum is another one I turn people on to, because even in those is a similar thing that what you're talking about. She's out there in the concentration camp and she hears the birds singing, and that's enough to keep her alive. And so, that I use that to say to clients, well, where are the good things, the little things that you can use on a daily basis to appreciate life? But here's another way that we're on the same wavelength, right? This idea of being in intense situations, which we all are now. And and it's a Stoic idea too, going back to what we've talked about earlier today with the Stoics. How do you hold yourself together in difficult times? And because if you let yourself go, there's nothing honorable in that. And so keeping your honor through this. So I think there's another book I'm going to put on my list for my clients. There we go. Yes, Solzhenitsyn. Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very
you.
much, Ibrahim. Thanks a lot. So we'll look forward to you as our featured guest next Saturday at 4
Thank
p.m.
you.
New York time at the APPA Agora. So that's just a quick plug. It's free and open to the public. So bring your friends.
Okay.
Matteo, your hand is up.
Thank you.
Please unmute. Go ahead. And then Rick.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Shanti, for your talk. That was very enlightening. I'd like to say the same thing about the previous three, Kevin, Carol, and Greg. All of your talks were actually quite interesting. I'm new to the space, and I'm in an awkward situation. I'm still not certified. This is my first annual meeting, but I've been doing this for about 20 years in one way or another. Mostly ad honorem, and many of the things you said, Shanti, really struck a chord here, because I see in the way in which you approach work with this client you described that in a certain sense you use a wide variety of tools that would say exceed what would normally be considered philosophical or even, I don't know if psychoanalytical, but clearly these tools work, and you strive. You discussed the idea that a method is required, and yet at the same time the method that you're constructing is made up of so many very specific, we could say very specific ideas or perhaps techniques or approaches that at the same time is very hard to collect. So there's something to me very unique about the way in which you are doing your work, and I feel that perhaps this is something that all of us encounter to some degree or another. Insofar as I find it very hard to prescribe, so to speak, an idea that has not really resonated with me. And sometimes I just find that these, I often cite, I don't know, obscure passages from work that nobody has read. And because those are the ones that I live by, and so it becomes very hard for me to think of a method. And yet, at times too, things become even more complicated, because the very idea of constructing something that I can somehow rely on faces the challenge of new clients who have an entirely different, we could say, mental constitution, and therefore what would be the best medicine for one ends up being poison for another. And so at times there's this tension, and I was really wondering how you would respond to this, but this tension between the need to construct a method, which we all face, and at the same time the need for freedom in addressing the client's needs.
Yeah, no, I know just what you're talking about, and I think that's why I really like my approach. Like, when I think about it, there's nothing that's going to get left out, and yet it's organized in a way that makes the movement of the work go forward. And I have a rationale for every philosophical school I'm using, and what I'm using from it, and why I'm using it. So that's, I think. Yeah, I think my approach is actually very, sophisticated, and I don't know, what's the word? Phil agreed. When I talked about it with David, I can't think I can't think of a better one. I keep trying to improve my approach, but I can't. If I could think of a better one, I would. So if you come up with a better one, or one that works, I want to hear other people's approaches. I really do, because I developed this out of my own, like I said, out of my own need to understand what I was doing, and I don't often see. I see people presenting one little piece here or another little piece here, but okay, but when the client walks in, what are you really thinking about overall? Where are you going to lead them? What's going to happen? And so yeah, I hope you do that in yourself, like, 'cause I think you're expressing a similar kind of confusion, like, okay, well, everybody comes in differently, and how am I going to organize all these different schools of thought that I've studied from Socrates till today? Yeah.
Well, Shanti, just to help you relax, Matteo is enrolled in our August program, so we'll be able to confuse him even further in a few weeks. But I think that the thing is that we philosophize from the client side. They've never had a philosophical conversation about their circumstances, no matter what their circumstances are. They've been psychologized from cradle to grave, but they've never really had a philosophical encounter. And so in that sense, it doesn't matter what you draw on, because they're going to have a philosophical encounter, and that in itself is a therapeutic experience. But we'll talk about this more in August, okay? So relax, it's all good. Rick, please.
Yeah, Shanti. I like that you contrasted your approach with what your characterization of my previous remarks at the Agora about when I was questioned about what my method is, and I said I don't have a method, but really that's just a way of speaking, because but it's interesting to try to figure out what your method is when you say you don't have a method. And I was noticing similarities between your approach and mine. I mean, those 4 Ps, participatory, pragmatic, I forget what the other ones were. Like, it's almost like there's elements of everything in your approach. So, you cover a lot of different methods, but it's still limited. It's not an unlimited number of methods, right? So there's a kind of a variety of tools that you like. My approach is similar, only I guess I just don't say, I keep my mind open to any possible method or framework or insight or analogy or intuition, whatever that might come up, because my attitude, and this is not a criticism, but the idea is that if my method is a hammer, I'm going to treat everything like it's a nail. And clients are not all nails. And I never know what they're going to come in with. And some of them don't come in with a problem. They just want to have a philosophical discussion. So, and this is part of my Gestalt training, like whatever presents itself, what intuitions come up in me that are ways to respond to whatever presents itself. So, and it's not about my method being better or your method being better. Each of us have ways that we function well as in this role, right? So, different skills and dispositions, like, William James, I think he said, whether you're an empiricist or a rationalist or pragmatist, this is a matter of disposition, not a result of argument or research or anything like that, right? We have different dispositions even as practitioners. And so that's what I would say, just in response, I'm just responding to the contrast between your method and my methodlessness. And the other, I'll say one last thing. I will pick methods, but I'm flexible about which ones I'll pick. And that happens after I've figured out what is the client here for. So that's all I want to say.
I understand your point too. That what you're saying is that just letting the client present themselves and then deciding which method will work, that you think will work best for them. I do think my approach enables that too. I guess that, when I think about like no approach, I mean, if you say I have no approach, you still have an approach, right? Because you still have to have one. And I think that was another thing I was thinking through from your talk was like, well, even how you approach the money or the time, the time that you give a client, that's a part of your approach, right? And so we all do have an approach. I mean, we do.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Or Shanti, if we don't have an approach, we have a meta approach. There's no escaping it. I mean, phenomenology is, I don't think one can do presuppositionless philosophy, you know? There's always a presupposition somewhere lurking, and there's always so the meta approach that lately, that I learned from Daisaku Ikeda is the idea of awakening the inner philosopher of the client. So that's not so proactive, as in saying, okay, we're going to work pragmatically or work, stoically or work this way. And those things are wonderful tools for the right person in the right situation. Absolutely. But if you, and I'm, confess to being a Platonist, and I think that people do have virtues dormant in them. And partly the job is to awaken the virtues in the client, not to sell them or give them or teach them, but to awaken them. And to that extent, when someone walks into your office, you don't know what kind of philosopher is dormant in that client. And you can conceive, I certainly conceive of my job as awakening the inner philosopher of the client. You don't know if you're going to awaken Plato or Nietzsche or Heidegger or whoever, but once that philosopher is awake, you may be astonished, and they may be astonished as to what kind of philosopher awakens, but then they're okay, because then they reconstitute for themselves a philosophy of life that helps them move on in a, obviously the caveat is all this should be beneficial, and they should be living in a non-harmful way. So awakening the inner philosopher is a meta method. And it is no contradiction with what you do or what Rick does or what Greg does. No contradiction, because the tools that we have at our resources are so diverse and vast that you can pick up any tool that's going to be useful to awaken the inner philosopher of the client. So we can think about meta method and not be embedded and shoehorn our clients. This is what I don't like about so much of psychology, and I know you agree, probably preaching to the choir, is that immediately they're going to shoehorn their clients into some predefined method and constrain them that way. And maybe it works for some, but I think philosophers are very different. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, from what you're saying, Lou, going back to our first presenter today, that that just, for example, like using the Socratic dialogue to in individual work and to waken up that inner philosopher more. And I think from what you're saying is perhaps in my desire to develop this approach, that if I step back even a little more, that might give the client more room for developing their own, I'm trying to teach, I'm, helping them come up with pragmatic solutions. I'm leading them towards this highest good. And that's all orchestrated. But what you're saying is somehow you leave this space more for a dialogue that pulls that out of them a bit more than what I'm saying. Is that?
Well, I'm saying we're working. I mean, you also attract to yourself clients I might not work well with, and vice versa. There's another dynamic that goes on here that we don't often discuss. Maybe we should think about it more and write about it more. And that is, how do you come to attract the clients that you do? And the ones that find you very helpful, well, there are reasons why. Maybe there are generalizations and maybe not. So I just think we have different ways of working, and long live that. It's an art form, and everybody in the room is going to work differently, even with the same person with the same problem, and long live that. This is true diversity. And that's why the client has to assume some responsibility in working with somebody, because it's not the same as seeing a dentist where you assume they all know how to fill a tooth and they're all going to more or less do it the same way, although some are better than others. There's nothing worse than bad dentistry, right? They all got the same piece of paper, but they're good dentists and bad dentists. And with us, it's even more all over the map, and long live that. Jorn, please. Unmute yourself.
Regarding method, I remember a quote, I think it was from Carl Jung. It goes something like this: the method in therapy is the therapist. So apart from any abstract formula on how to proceed, what is most important for the client is the personality and the human being behind the person who gives advice. That's the way I understand that quote. So the human to human connection and what the counselor can give to the person, that's the method of the encounter.
Shanti, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I do think, I mean, I have worked on my own state of being as a primary component. And I know I did take time off almost 15 years when I realized that I had to improve my state of being before I could be a good counselor. And I'm hoping, you know, when I was able to start working as a counselor, again, it was because I felt that my state of being had risen to a level that would be therapeutic on all levels or most levels. I'm a human being for my clients. So I agree with you. It's central, that work on oneself to be an exemplar, a loving human being, all the good things that we think of as clients, as counselors for our clients.
And to add, Jorn, and to add one thing to that, it's also that we need to be good listeners. We don't always give advice or don't always prescribe. We don't have to, but we want to be good listeners. You know, philosophers are notorious for understanding things that nobody else understands, or for pretending to understand things that nobody else understands. We're supposed to be good at understanding because we work with very complex materials on a given day. And I believe I've come through 30 years and more of practice. I've come to believe, I didn't have it initially, but I've acquired the belief that people want to be understood. It's a passive will. You know, psychology is full of debates about what's primary, you know, Freud's will to pleasure or you know, Frankl's will to meaning, or Adler's will, Nietzsche's will to power, whatever, all these active wills. But there's a passive will in people, I believe, which is a will to be understood. And when people feel, when we create a reflective space without judgment, and we give our clients a chance to be understood, that has therapeutic value without even saying a word to them about philosophy. I think Shanti and Greg and honestly, all of you today have conveyed this, that your clients are understood by you, or they feel at the end of the day like you understand them. I think that came out right from the beginning with Kevin, and I think with Carol, and with you know, with Greg and with Shanti. That's a common denominator. Your clients are partly helped because you somehow understand what their problem is in a way that's not a diagnosis. Yeah, that makes sense.
Sometimes that's the case, but one way that you can tell that it's not is they don't have another session with you afterwards, right?
Well, that could mean you understood them too well for their liking. I mean, it can cut both ways, right? So you never know. I always say, Greg, that if my clients don't come back, I just assume they're fine, you know, but that's of course a fallacy. But so when they fire you, it's not so good. You know, if they come back with a lawyer and sue you, it's not so good. But if they just come for a while and then leave, then, you know, what the assumption is that you didn't harm them. Let's put it that way. You did no harm, maybe a lot of good. We should thank Shanti for this. Rick, you have one more? I'll give you a parting shot, and then we'll take another break, and we'll welcome Jorn. Go ahead, Rick.
In the article that Shanti mentioned from Vice magazine about philosophical counseling, one of the clients came to me with confusion about free will and agency because of his meditation practice and Zen, and if I'm watching my thoughts, do I have agency, whatever. And being that I specialize in free will, I mapped out the possibilities for him. He left me to go for a psychotherapist who also is a meditation teacher because I didn't tell him what to believe. I told him I don't have the answers about free will. I could just map out the things that make sense. Just wanted to share that anecdote after what Lou said about when they leave and they'll come back.
Now, we can't predict success or failure with our clients, we can certainly evaluate it, as Shanti showed us quite eloquently. There are, evidence-based evaluations, which are not entirely subjective. What psychiatrists and psychotherapists call success is positive behavioral change. That's what they can measure. All exit surveys are subjective, but positive behavioral change is somewhat measurable, at least indirectly. And I think that we have been able, as a profession, to affect tremendous, in anecdotal and in many individual cases, tremendous positive behavioral change from applying philosophy. That's a wonderful thing that we're doing, and the world needs more of it than it knows.